Almost without exception, our NATO allies opened their bases and their airspace to support this mission. That access was critical to sustaining an operation of this scale. But this conflict also reminded us who our friends are not. China and Russia reportedly assisted Iran during this conflict. That should concern every American citizen. Any effort by our adversaries to help Iran rebuild its military must carry consequences. And while Operation Epic Fury has concluded, pressure on the Iranian regime continues. I want to hear more from Admiral Cooper about how CENTCOM's current posture, including the blockade of the Iranian ports, is supporting diplomatic efforts by increasing pressure on what remains of the regime. My understanding is that the damage to Iran's oil infrastructure and the loss of millions of dollars in daily revenue are imposing severe economic cost on Tehran. That pressure matters because not only must Iran never obtain a nuclear weapon, it must also not be allowed to dominate the Strait of Hormuz. China is watching closely to see whether the United States will defend freedom of navigation, protect global commerce, and respond decisively to aggression. We must not falter in our resolve. At the same time, we must not forget the area of the Middle East and Africa remain hotbeds of terrorism. It is imperative that we continue hunting ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, and other terrorist groups before they can threaten our homeland. I want to hear from both commanders about how they are working with regional partners to keep terrorists on the run. The successful operation over the weekend targeting the second-in-command of ISIS in Nigeria demonstrated once again that terrorists have no refuge from the United States military or our partners. General Anderson, to sustain that pressure, I want your assessment of whether AFRICOM has the necessary resources. I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses today. I yield to the ranking member, my friend Adam Smith, for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank our witnesses for coming before us today. The CENTCOM and AFRICOM AORs are incredibly important, and if there's one word to sum it up right now, it's instability. And that instability is incredibly dangerous. Certainly we will talk, I know, a great deal about the war against Iran and the instability in the Middle East, but Africa is also a very unstable place right now. We are engaged in bombing campaign from time to time in Nigeria. ISIS and ISIS affiliates are rising, particularly in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. So that instability is definitely making us less safe. Terrorist organizations have bases of support. An almost caliphate-like situation is existing in Africa, and obviously we've seen the chaos in the Middle East with the rise of Shia-backed militias in Iraq, the ongoing war between Israel and Lebanon, and obviously the ongoing conflict with Iran and the shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz. It goes beyond the national security threat in terms of terrorism, the economy. The impact it's having certainly on our economy, but the global economy as well. And then we can also have the rise of disease. We have a strain of Ebola that apparently is stronger than usual growing up in the DRC, where there is also instability. So the number one biggest thing is, how can we bring more stability to the region? Work with partners, allies, others in the region to get us to a better place than we are in right now, because it is as bad as it's been for a very, very long time. On Iran, I disagree with the chairman, unsurprisingly. Yes, we have knocked back a lot of Iran's capability. The truth of the matter is, in all the questions that I've asked, we don't know for sure how much. We don't know exactly how many ballistic missiles they have, what their capabilities are. We know it has been substantially weakened, but we don't have specific answers to that. We also have to worry about the fact that Russia, China, and North Korea are more than willing to be helpful to Iran, and I'm not sure, threats aside, we're in a position to change their mind about that. So we have to be worried about that. But we do know for sure, whatever capability Iran has, they have the capability to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. And frankly, I don't care whether they've got 75% less ballistic missiles, 80% less ballistic missiles. They clearly, the regime is in place. It's not going anywhere. It is more hardline than it was when this war started, and they have done something that they had not previously done, which is shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which is causing massive economic disasters for us and for the entire world. So, we can go through the body count here and say we destroyed this many ballistic missiles, we destroyed this many launchers, we set their capability back. That's all fascinating, Strategically, we are in a disaster right now, and that's what needs to be fixed. And we do not see a path out of that. Let's just focus on the nuclear weapon program, because any criticism of the war is sort of met with, well, gosh, if it wasn't for the war, Iran would have already detonated nuclear weapons in the Middle East. That's completely ridiculous. I mean, that's an argument for Fox News and Newsmax maybe, but in the real world, that doesn't justify what has happened, because the nuclear program for Iran is no weaker today than it was when this war started. We have destroyed none of their nuclear material and set them back not one tiny little bit. The only thing that has changed on Iran's nuclear program, they are now unwilling to negotiate about it. They were willing to negotiate. They were actively negotiating about it when we started this war. So please, let's not get over into the detail about, oh, we destroyed this many missiles, this many launchers. What is the strategic plan to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and get us any closer to stopping Iran's nuclear program? For all the criticisms of the previous presidents, which of course the current president was one of those previous presidents, all of those previous presidents managed to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon without dropping the Middle East and much of the world into chaos. That is really the difference right now. And I know most of the uniform folks, when we ask these questions, say, well, we're just going to tell you what's going on. We don't do the strategy. I find that an incredibly unacceptable answer, and not an answer that I had ever gotten before from uniformed personnel under any other president. The whole "we just work here" thing doesn't really work. You guys should have strategic answers, and you should be willing to share them with the American people and with this committee. Where we're at right now is the president, every few days, threatens to kill as many Iranians as humanly possible. He does it in a variety of different language, but basically, no quarter, we will erase their civilization, we'll kill every single person in Iran. And the chairman's absolutely right. The Iranian regime is awful, evil, terrible. They've killed tens of thousands of Iranian civilians and done terrible things throughout the region. What, are we in a competition with them now to talk about how many Iranian civilians we can kill? So just saying that pushes a good chunk of the world further away from us. They're like, I don't know that we want to deal with those people. But of course, he says it, and then the next day or 2 days later doesn't do anything, much less that, and then claims that Iran is now willing to negotiate on all these issues. In fact, the absolute nadir of this process was, I think it was 4 weeks ago, when I woke up Friday morning and the president said, Iran has completely capitulated. You remember that? The war was over. Iran had agreed to get rid of their nukes, get rid of their terrorism support, get rid of their ballistic missiles, open up. The Strait was open. And there was reporting all day long like this was real. The president literally made it up. There was no progress whatsoever. And now the credibility of our entire country, because sadly the credibility of our country hinges on the credibility of our president, is dead. Who's going to believe anything we say? There is no evidence today that Iran is negotiating any of these things. Their position has not budged. Pay us to open up the Strait. That's basically their position, which is an incredibly weaker position for us. So what we need to know today is, what's the strategic plan to get us out of this hole we're in? And thumping our chest about how many successful missions we ran doesn't change the fact that our economy is in the toilet. Inflation is higher than it's been in 3 or 4 years. Gas prices are up $1.50, and there's no end in sight. And it's worse for the rest of the world, because as the president dismissively pointed out, but correctly pointed out, the rest of the world is more dependent upon the Strait of Hormuz being open than we are, which makes them just so grateful to us for having effectively shut it down. So let's hear a plan that isn't the president getting up in the morning and imagining that somehow wish fulfillment works in foreign policy, imagining that Iran has completely capitulated to all of our demands. What is an actual plan to get us out of this hole that the United States has done such an outstanding job of digging for all of us? That's what we need to hear today. I yield back.
Thank the ranking member. Now I'd like to introduce our witnesses. First, we have the Honorable Dan Zimmerman, Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs, Admiral Brad Cooper, Commander of CENTCOM, and General Dagvin Anderson, Commander of AFRICOM. Welcome to our witnesses. Mr. Zimmerman, we'll start with you. You're recognized.
Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Smith and distinguished members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the posture of our forces and strategic priorities within the U.S. Central Command and U.S. Africa Command areas of responsibility. It is my honor to appear alongside CENTCOM Commander Admiral Cooper and AFRICOM Commander General Anderson. My testimony today will focus on the Department's approach to posture and strategy in these two theaters and how that is guided by our National Defense Strategy, or NDS. The NDS is based on the principles of peace through strength and America First foreign policy, flowing from the conviction that a government's first duty is always to its own citizens. Our strategy has 4 succinct lines of effort. First, we will defend the homeland. Second, we will deter China in the Indo-Pacific. Third, we will encourage and expect our allies and partners to step up and take more responsibility, especially in those areas where they have direct national security interests. And finally, to achieve all of this, we must supercharge the U.S. defense industrial base. Our strategy is America First. The United States will prioritize theaters and challenges with the greatest consequence for American interests and where only American power can play a decisive role. Our adversaries must understand without doubt that the United States possesses both the capability and the political will to use decisive force to protect its vital interests and to safeguard the security and prosperity of the American people. As the NDS lays out, we aim to work with and support our allies and partners around the world to deter threats, set conditions for peace, and to pursue mutual security interests. Regarding the Middle East, President Trump has made clear that the United States seeks a more peaceful and prosperous Middle East, one defined by commerce and not chaos. This needs to be a Middle East where our allies and partners invest in and take the lead in responsibility for their own security. But to be clear, the United States will always retain the ability to act decisively to defend ourselves and our allies where and when we need. Operation Epic Fury is an example of this strategy in action. The President initiated Operation Epic Fury in direct response to the Iranian regime that waged a one-sided war against America for 47 years that threatened allies and partners and caused thousands of American casualties. And I would like to mention here and acknowledge the 14 fallen service members. We honor them and their families. Across every domain, land, sea, air, and cyber, the U.S. Joint Force delivered synchronized and layered effects to disrupt, degrade, and destroy Iran's ability to conduct and sustain combat operations. The Secretary has noted that although Operation Epic Fury was historic for its complexity, lethality, and precision, it also had a laser-focused mission, scoped to our interests, and the defense of our people and our allies. President Trump also seeks to redefine the United States' relationship with Africa, transitioning from an aid-focused relationship to a trade and investment-focused relationship, favoring partnerships with capable, reliable states intent on achieving common interests. Our department will take a resource-sustainable approach to counterterrorism and stand ready to take direct action against Islamic terrorists in Africa who are both capable of and intent on striking the U.S. homeland, while empowering African and other partners to lead efforts to degrade and destroy terrorist organizations throughout the continent. Our operation with Nigeria over the weekend is an example of this strategy in action. Working alongside Nigerian partners, U.S. forces executed a raid in northeast Nigeria, killing the ISIS Global Director of Operations, Bilal al-Muniki, and members of his inner circle. Muniki will no longer be able to plot against American citizens and interests. In conclusion, the Department of War will continue without wavering to defend and secure the freedom and prosperity of the United States. Our posture in the U.S. CENTCOM and U.S. AFRICOM AORs is a coherent and integrated execution of our national defense strategy. It is an America First policy that advances peace through strength. Under the direction of President Trump, the Department has demonstrated our commitment and capability to defend the homeland and secure American priorities abroad while encouraging our allies and partners to increasingly shoulder responsibility on mutual security interests. The Department is confident in this strategy, in our exceptional service members, and in our ability to defend the United States. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. Admiral Cooper, you're recognized.
Well, good morning, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and thanks especially to the committee for your steadfast support to the U.S. military and U.S. Central Command. I'm pleased to join today with Commander of U.S. Africa Command, my good friend General Dag Anderson, and Assistant Secretary Dan Zimmerman. I'm grateful to be accompanied by my wife Susan, representing the families of the more than 50,000 service members deployed in the Middle East. I'm also pleased to be joined by Fleet Command Master Chief Lateef Compton, the senior enlisted leader of CENTCOM. Recent events in the Central region show how quickly the course of history can change. Decades-old features of the strategic landscape, believed immutable, have been upended, bringing both challenges and opportunities. I strongly believe that every success that we have starts and ends with our people. In just the last 7 months, America's sons and daughters serving in CENTCOM have played key roles in implementing the President's 20-point peace plan for Gaza, degrading the ISIS threat in Syria, preventing an ISIS crisis by conducting a historic transfer of over 5,700 ISIS prisoners from Syria to Iraq, creating the most integrated and effective regional air defense architecture ever seen, which was decades in the making, and most recently addressing the rapidly accelerating Iranian threat. U.S. Central Command was created in direct response to the threats posed by the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I'm the 16th CENTCOM commander to deal with the Iranian problem set. For 47 years, the Iranian regime terrorized the region and made hostility to the United States a core tenet of its rule. The regime is an even more deadly threat to its own people, killing tens of thousands of innocent Iranians during protests in January, with public executions ongoing. Iran has long had 3 pillars of intimidation and coercion: their nuclear program, their ballistic missiles and drones, and their proxies, especially Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. Let's look at each of these. First, all signs pointed to Iran's intent to create a nuclear weapon capability. And then to protect their nuclear program, Iran built thousands of ballistic missiles and drones, and they did it for 2 reasons: to create a shield to make their nuclear site untouchable, and to create an offensive capability so large that regional partners couldn't possibly defend against it. Along the way, their proxies did Iran's dirty work across the region. Prior to the start of Epic Fury, Iranian-supported terror groups attacked U.S. troops and diplomats more than 350 times in the previous 2.5 years, killing 4 U.S. service members and wounding nearly 200 others. To directly counter this accelerating Iranian strategy that we all saw, the U.S. military was directed by the President to execute 2 significant operations, and here are the results. First, Operation Midnight Hammer significantly degraded Iran's nuclear program. And second, Operation Epic Fury significantly degraded Iran's ballistic missiles and drones while destroying 90% of their defense industrial base, ensuring that Iran cannot reconstitute for years. And then finally, Iran spent decades and billions of dollars arming proxies. Today, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are cut off from Iran's weapons supply and support. Said a different way, American military action derailed Iran's strategy that was 47 years in the making. So where are we now? The ceasefire continues, and consistent with the President's direction, we've established a highly effective maritime blockade of Iran. To date, we've turned away 88 ships. There has been 0 trade into Iranian ports and 0 trade out of Iranian ports, squeezing Iran economically and creating powerful leverage for the ongoing negotiations. Of course, these results were not without cost. We honor the memories of the 14 service members who made the ultimate sacrifice during Operation Epic Fury, and 2 soldiers and a civilian killed in Palmyra, Syria. They represent the very best among all of us. But before I close, I want to make clear, we are committed to the law of armed conflict. The United States does not target civilians. We take all civilian casualty reports seriously. This is now part of our culture, and I invite each and every one of you, as well as all of your staffs, to visit Tampa and see our targeting process for yourselves. As I sit here, we're clear-eyed. The situation in front of us is complex. High-stakes negotiations continue. Our job is to be ready, and we are. I testify today on behalf of the brave servicemen and women deployed to the Central region. It's a great life honor and privilege to serve as their commander, and thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Admiral. General, you're recognized.
Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide you an update on U.S. Africa Command. I'm joined today by Command Sergeant Major Garrick Banfield, AFRICOM Senior Enlisted Leader, and it's an honor for me to be here today with my friend and colleague, Admiral Cooper, and Honorable Dan Zimmerman. We all appreciate your unwavering support to our nation's warfighters. Before I start, I'd like to recognize the service of First Lieutenant Kendrick Lamont Key, Jr., and Specialist Mariah Collington, who lost their lives in a tragic accident during African Lion. I would also like to thank our allies and partners, particularly Morocco, who stepped forward when it mattered most. Today, the epicenter of global terrorism is in Africa. ISIS leadership is African. Al-Qaeda's economic engine is in Africa. Both groups share the will and intent to strike our homeland. As the President reported this past Friday, AFRICOM, in close coordination with our Nigerian partners, dealt a significant blow to ISIS global terror network. Our successful mission eliminated several key ISIS leaders, to include Abu Bilal al-Manuki, the most active and impactful terrorist in the world. He was the ISIS financial and organizational mastermind plotting attacks against the United States and our interests. Manuki's death disrupts ISIS operations around the world, but only sustained pressure and multidimensional approach with the support of partners united by mutual security interests can address this complex problem. As this recent operation demonstrates, AFRICOM is prioritizing willing and capable partners. We support partners with unique capabilities that only the U.S. can provide, such as ISR, targeting, and precision strike. This approach has taken ISIS leaders off the battlefield in Nigeria and driven their leadership in Somalia underground, putting pressure on the broader ISIS network. In West Africa, Al-Qaeda affiliate JNIM has demonstrated increased capacity to control key terrain in the Sahel, most notably by strangling fuel supplies around population centers. The capture of a capital city would provide Al-Qaeda with all the trappings of a nation-state to sponsor global terrorism. With a 75% reduction in our regional posture over the past decade, compounded by the drawdown of our allies, we struggle with an intelligence black hole. Without sufficient indicators and warnings, we risk being blind to the gathering dangers and threats of the region. AFRICOM's lack of expeditionary capabilities and diminished force posture compromises our crisis response. In a crisis, we can surge assets, but you cannot surge trust. Our reduced presence on the continent also allows disruptive actors to drive the agenda and undercut American interests. China views Africa as its second continent, securing control over critical minerals and infrastructure, potentially boxing us out of the resources that energize our industrial base. Africa also serves as Putin's purse, where Russia exploits instability to extract resources, including human lives, to fuel its war machine. To contend with these threats, AFRICOM must think and operate differently. With less than 0.1% of the department's budget, we must maximize every taxpayer dollar to deliver an outsized return on investment. AFRICOM continues to leverage low-cost, high-yield activities to amplify our impact on the continent. International military education and training and the State Partnership Program are reliable force multipliers, forging partnerships with African militaries and demonstrating cost-effective burden sharing. The AFRICOM exercise program is emerging as a battle lab to test and validate new technologies on behalf of both the Joint Force and our African partners. Finally, Africa sits at the crossroads of global commerce and security, bridging strategic terrain between the Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific. It is the world supplier of critical minerals for advanced defense systems and home to 12 of the 20 fastest growing economies. By 2050, it will account for a third of the global working age population. AFRICOM is increasingly focused on this critical convergence of economy and security and stability. Our efforts span all elements of national power, and we coordinate closely with state, commerce, energy, and treasury. The department's new economic defense unit has been an invaluable partner. To defend the homeland, promote U.S. interests, and ensure effective crisis response, AFRICOM needs targeted investments in layered non-traditional ISR, innovative force protection, programs that enable willing and capable partners, the opportunity to expand experimentation, and the ability to respond to crisis at the time and point of need. Africa is a continent of opportunities, not only crises. With the continued support of this committee, I can assure you that every dollar you authorize for AFRICOM will contribute directly to the security, safety, and prosperity of the United States. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. Thank all the witnesses for being here in those testimonies. That's very helpful to us. I recognize myself for questions. Admiral Cooper, you have spent the last 6 years in either senior leadership or command positions in the Middle East. In your expert opinion, was there any time over the last 40 years that Iran or the Iranian regime posed a greater threat to the United States, Israel, and our allies in the region before Midnight Hammer and Epic Fury?
No, sir.
So are they less capable today than they were before those exercises?
They are significantly less capable today than they were before the two major operations.
And what would a nuclear-armed Iran mean for our partners in the Middle East and our presence there?
Well, clearly the President has stated Iran will not be nuclear armed. It would obviously represent a very highly destabilizing element into the region and have global impact.
So basically, we're safer, our country's safer, and our allies in the region are safer because of what our President's done in Iran over the last couple of months.
We are unquestionably safer as a result of U.S. military actions.
Thank you. General Anderson, the operation that eliminated the global ISIS second-in-command over the weekend demonstrated the growing terrorist threat in your AOR, but also the value of the partnerships that we have there. How are you strengthening those partnerships in your AOR going forward to make sure that that threat doesn't make it to our homeland?
Chairman, that's an incredibly important point because we cannot operate there and respond to these crises or these threats without the access, basing, and overflight that is dependent upon the relationships with these partners. So we are investing a significant amount of effort in order to build those relationships and build that credibility. The operation over the weekend built a lot of that credibility of what the U.S. can bring and that those unique capabilities can be brought to bear in conjunction with our partners. The Nigerians have been instrumental throughout the last several months developing the target, helping us with the intelligence, and providing support in order to do that. So it could not have been done by our own forces, that we needed to do that in conjunction with them. We are using that to leverage that to engage with other nations, such as those in the Sahel, where the terrorist threat continues to grow, to try to open that dialogue so we can address this mutual threat.
Is there anything in particular that this committee could do to be helpful to you in developing partnerships that can benefit us in the future?
Yes, sir. I think some key investments in some of the expeditionary capabilities, such as a float-forward staging base, expeditionary ISR is critical to that. Support for continued engagement with small teams, such as our special operations teams or small conventional trainers, goes a long way. And then the last one I would say that is not as much in the military realm, but where we see the security convergence and intersection with economics is encouraging investment and development in Africa that allows for that stability to continue to develop, because security depends upon stability. That allows investment, and that leads to prosperity, and that's eventually helps protect the United States in the long run. So while not directly our role, we can help identify those areas where those investments have security implications.
Yeah, well, I do think it's important when we talk about our role there that we make it clear to the larger universe of members of Congress that we do need to be building partnerships in the African continent, and we don't need to be tying that to them changing their cultural values necessarily. We need partnerships, and whether we like it or not, China and Russia and Iran are all down there building partnerships, and they're not judging these people based on their cultural values. So it's something I think we can learn from. With that, I will yield to the ranking member for any questions he may have.
Thank you. Admiral Cooper, you mentioned in your opening remarks the commitment of your command to preventing civilian harm. So just two questions about that. One, it's been 80 days, thereabouts, since the initial bombing campaign that struck the girls' school in Iran. Tehran killed, I think, over 150 schoolgirls. It's really pretty clear what happened there. But 80 days on, we have not taken responsibility for that attack. The endless stalling that's being investigated, it's being investigated, it's being investigated. In the past, when we've had these types of mistakes, they have been quickly acknowledged, even if a further investigation is necessary to figure out prevention methods. So can you, at this moment, acknowledge that that mistake was made and that we were responsible for it? It's something we didn't want to do and don't want to repeat?
Congressman, to reiterate, the United States does not deliberately target
Got that part.
Period. Full stop. and nor are the Iranian people our enemy. The IRGC is the adversary in this case.
I
The
heard that in your
investigation-
opening statement, Admiral. I asked you a very specific question, and I'm curious what the answer is.
So the investigation is ongoing. As soon as it is complete, I'm happy to be as
So that's a
transparent
no.
as possible.
We will not
And-
take
and what-
responsibility
and-
for something we very obviously did.
And what, sir, it's a complex investigation. The school itself is located on an active IRGC cruise missile base.
Absolutely.
It's more complex than the average strike. As soon as
Absolutely.
we're complete, I'm fully committed to transparency, given your important oversight role and the other members here.
Just so you know,
Important
and I have an enormous amount of respect for you and an enormous amount of respect for the Pentagon, I do not trust that answer. What we've seen out of this Secretary of Defense and his callous disregard for any sort of rules of engagement or protecting civilian life may make us suspicious. And that's the only second question I have for you. Do you think it's ever appropriate for anybody in a leadership position to use the words "no quarter" when describing how we are conducting our operations in Iran?
So I think it's appropriate as military leaders, we follow the law of armed conflict and our constitutional responsibilities, and that's what we've done.
And you would agree that no quarter is not following the law?
I would agree it's our constitutional responsibility to follow the law.
Is no quarter following the law or not?
I would agree that we follow the law, sir.
Right, but you're not going to get specific
the
about it.
monikers and
We're
how
just
other
going to have
people
sort of a
characterize
general,
things.
generic understanding of it,
I
and
just
then
keep it
do
super
whatever
simple,
we
sir.
want to do with no accountability. Look, people make mistakes. It's in a war. Things happen. I get that, okay? And I'm not going to be as overly judgmental as some. But that the arrogance of this Pentagon and their unwillingness to acknowledge any mistake is precisely the reason that we are in the hole that we're in with no way out of. Somebody in that command needs to own up to the dumb things that are said and done to give us some confidence that they won't keep happening. Mr. Zimmerman, can you explain to me how it works, why it is considered to be intelligent for the president day after day after day to keep saying that Iran has agreed to things that very clearly they have not agreed to, which then becomes obvious to the entire world within some 24 to 48-hour time period? Help me out here. What is the strategy of the president standing up and saying, we have defeated them, the war is over, they've agreed to everything? I mean, doesn't that just make us look like a bunch of clowns past a certain point when it becomes obvious that that's not the case?
Congressman, the president's willingness to act decisively to protect Americans and our partners and allies has advanced U.S. credibility. It has not sunk U.S. credibility.
Well, but addressing this specific issue, we could have that debate in a different direction. But he has repeatedly said that Iran has agreed to things that they obviously have not agreed to. And let me ask the question this way. Is the president misinformed? Are people doing a bad job of informing him about what's going on? Is he that ignorant about the circumstances? Or is he just making it up as part of some, I don't know, six-dimensional chess strategy here? So why?
The president has the best information available to any head of state.
Why does he keep getting it wrong then?
The president does not keep getting it wrong. The White House is leading these negotiations to find a long-term solution.
I'm sorry, I
for
got
the
20
Iran
seconds
situation.
left here, but he doesn't keep getting it wrong. He says, literally, the strait is open. Iran has agreed to give up their nuclear weapons. Iran has agreed to give up their ballistic missile programs. That's your basic question. Is the Strait of Hormuz open? Has Iran given up their nuclear weapons?
The Strait of Hormuz is a complex situation right now, where you have a severely degraded foe.
I hope you look back at this and understand how bad this is making you look. I mean, look, you can answer the question now. You can challenge me in 1,000 different ways, but to just pretend that reality isn't reality and say it over and over again in a public hearing, I'm sorry, that's not helping our credibility. Thank you for the indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes a gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman Mike Rogers, for your correct assessment that the American military is unmatched professionalism, as we see with the three witnesses today. How reassuring for the American people, and how a deterrence it is to the enemies we have around the world. I've never been more appreciative of the American military than I am today. As a 31-year veteran myself, I'm really grateful that I've had 4 sons serve in Iraq, Egypt, Afghanistan, to see the success. And dictators are on the run. It began grateful with dictator Assad in Syria. And he actually, an honor, he declared me an enemy of the state November a year ago, and then with President Trump's election, he fled to Moscow. And now President Trump is giving Syria a chance. The dictator's gone. And then I'm really grateful that the dictatorship in Venezuela has been removed. Again, what extraordinary success. I was really grateful to have the opportunity to let President Trump know how much the American military, American citizens appreciate that he showed that the Russian anti-aircraft capability is not very good, Chinese radar fails, and Cuban mercenaries are expendable. And then you get to the ultimate, and it just should not be misunderstood historically. The elimination of Khomeini and his leadership in world history, I'm not aware of any conflict begun where in the first minute the leadership, dictatorship was eliminated. And how deserving, because he had just murdered 40,000 of his own citizens. And so he deserved what came his way, despite the sympathy of the American media that we should have given notice. With that in mind, too, around the world, from operations in the Western Hemisphere against narco-terrorists to decisive action against the Iranian regime, through Operation Epic Fury to the continued efforts against terrorists and malign actors across Africa and the Middle East, our service members have demonstrated extraordinary courage, precision, and unmatched professionalism. As we confront Iran and its puppets who have attacked and murdered the Israelis, and the terrorist organizations and war criminal Putin, who wants to resurrect the Soviet Union, the failed Soviet Union, annexing Belarus, leaving troops in Moldova, invading Georgia, rigging elections in the Republic of Georgia, where the correct president, a legitimate president, is Shlomo Saakashvili, and then, of course, the invasion of Ukraine with tens of thousands of people who have lost their lives. With that in mind, the growing influence of the Chinese Communist Party, we need to assure that the Central Command and Africa Command have the posture, partnerships, and capabilities needed to defend the homeland, protect our allies, and achieve peace through strength. With that, Admiral Cooper, you have documented really well the success of Operation Epic Fury, which has been a devastating blow to the dictatorship in Iran and ability to murder Israelis and Americans. In your assessment, has this degraded Iran's ability to generate another October 7th with mass murder of Israeli citizens?
Congressman, first, thank you for your own service and that of your children. We honor them today. My assessment from a military perspective is, as we sit here today, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis have been cut off from the decades-long flow of military supplies, and thus mitigating and eliminating any chance of a future October 7th based on the circumstances right now.
I just agree with your assessment, and it's just remarkable, the achievements of our military. And Secretary Zimmerman, I appreciate your North Carolina heritage, and the Department has promoted partners in both the Middle East and Africa to assume more responsibility for their own security. How are we achieving this without creating a vacuum against war criminal Putin or the Chinese Communist Party or the regime in Tehran?
Thank you, Congressman. And as we are working to find operationally independent partners with shared security interests who can responsibly take up the security burden alongside us, we are very clear-eyed about the threats across the CENTCOM and AFRICOM theater that these adversaries present. And we have not lost sight of those.
And indeed, Admiral Cooper, we did have allies come to work with us in Operation Epic Fury. Can you identify key allies that were helpful?
Congressman, most notably, we literally serve side by side in this broad Middle East air defense network with 5 Middle East partners, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar.
Gentleman's
Kuwait,
time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman
Jordan
from
and Israel.
Connecticut, Mr. Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. Mr. Zimmerman and Admiral Cooper, in your testimony, Admiral, you in page 3 stated that one of the top priorities of CENTCOM is preserving America's advantage and position of strength relative to China. Mr. Zimmerman, in page 1, you said, secondly, we will deter China in the Indo-Pacific region through strength, not confrontation. So the U.S. Navy Naval Institute publishes a weekly ship tracker, which again identifies where our surface ships are located around the world today. So last night's tracker shows that there are 25 warships that are in the Central Command region. 2 more minesweepers are apparently on the way to join the fleet. In Indo-Pacific, we have 1 carrier, the George Washington, which is not actually just being fitted out for deployment. It's not actually underway with a strike force. And we have 1 ARG-MU amphibious ship with 3 accompanying vessels. That's 4. That's the total count. That's 52% of the surface of the Earth is in the Indo-Pacific region. And because of this war, we have ships that are home ported in Yokosuka, Pearl Harbor, that are now situated in Central Command. And I guess the question I have for you, Mr. Zimmerman, the National Defense Strategy states that the U.S. will build and sustain a strong denial defense along the first island chain. Right now, I don't know how that's possible, given the fact that so many forces, naval forces, have been concentrated in command. How is this policy, this war, aligned with our national defense strategy, which identified China as still the #1 pacing threat?
Congressman, we remain fully committed to the priorities as you have outlined them there, including denial defense and deterring China peace.
With what?
Congressman, we retain the ability to act decisively when and where we need to around the globe. That's all part of the global force management process. The Indo-Pacific theater is not part of my theater, so I'll be careful how broadly I speak. But rest assured, the department is 100% committed to the priorities laid out in the NDS, and we retain the ability to act to implement all those priorities,
Thank you. So,
including.
Mr. Chairman, I would just ask that the USNI tracker dated May 18th be admitted to the record, which again just shows the incredible imbalance that we have right now in terms of the positioning of our fleet. I would also note, Mr. Rogers correctly stated how important it is to build up partnerships. Right now, we have a terrible energy crisis in this country, which Mr. Smith referred to. Eastern Asia is of a totally bigger, more catastrophic magnitude. Countries are implementing 4-day work weeks. They're doing rationing because of the fact that not only is the price is not going up, but because they depend on the Strait of Hormuz, supplies are actually being run down right now. It is not really hard for people to sort of understand who's causing this in terms of countries that we are trying to build partnerships. And frankly, I think that is another strategic harm that this war has created in terms of, again, the #1 identified defense challenge that we face, according to Trump's own defense strategy. Admiral Cooper, I have a couple quick questions for you. Is a blockade an act of war?
So we're executing the blockade today consistent with international armed conflict.
Well, the international law actually, in terms of blockades, was established in 1909 at the London Naval Conference, which the U.S. participated in, and the U.S. Senate actually voted to endorse. And it defined blockades as an act of war. Blockades don't work unless you have warships there to enforce them. So of course it's an act of war. I mean, and again, that's black letter maritime law, isn't it?
So I defer to the department as well as the White House in any characterization of how we execute business from a combatant command standpoint. From my perspective, we execute the orders as given, and today the legal umbrella that we're operating under is international armed conflict.
Well, it is really, as I said, not even a question of law or facts. I mean, if we had a Navy blockading the port of New York and New Jersey, we would treat that as an act of war. And the notion that somehow the ceasefire stopped the tolling of the War Powers Act in April when we put a blockade a few days later, which is an act of war, again, fails the legal test, which you don't need to really get intense advice from Office of Legal Counsel. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Turner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Anderson, in your opening portion of your written statement, you say that AFRICOM, we work with our African partners and our allies on collective security. You then note that you're facing more demanding challenges with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, but also disruptive actors like Russia, China, and Iran. I want to turn to Kenya and Russia. I believe that Kenya is a strong ally. You would agree that Kenya is a strong ally, would you not, General?
Yes, I would.
I've been to Kenya. I've seen and I'm aware of our collective operations, and I was very surprised and very concerned when I saw the New York Times reporting of Kenya's National Intelligence Service report that up to 1,000 Kenyans had been solicited by Russia and had been taken by Russia to fight in Ukraine, and that they had taken them from Kenya and they'd ended up in the front lines of Ukraine. What struck me is not just that there were Russians in Kenya that were operating, but that the enormity of what an operation would be to be able to solicit and obtain and convince 1,000 Kenyans to leave Kenya, go to Russia, end up in Ukraine fighting, and the structure, just the logistics of that, and the influence campaign that is. Are you familiar with that report? Could you speak about that and really the necessity of us to be able to counter that work and assist the Kenyans in countering Russia in Kenya?
Yes, Congressman, I agree, and it is disturbing how many Africans from across the continent are being recruited by Russia to fight in Ukraine, so it's not solely a Kenyan problem. To the point in Kenya, I agree the concern has been, and I think it was highlighted in that New York Times article as well, is that it's not been clear that they were recruited to go to Ukraine, often using other reasons to recruit them, whether for work or for other jobs, not necessarily articulating the fact that they end up on the front lines in Ukraine. So one of those things that we have done to help counter that is just implement the truth. By being able to inform other partners of what's happening has been very powerful.
But this is not just disinformation, them being told what they're going to do and then they're ending up in Ukraine, but that there's this infrastructure that Russia has deployed, and 1,000 out of Kenya is pretty enormous. So you're up against a pretty enormous structure that Russia has deployed within Kenya.
Russia is using many different means in order to recruit folks from across the continent, and you are correct, they do have the network in order to bring them back into Russia.
Thank you. Secretary Zimmerman, first off, congratulations on your answers to the ranking member. They were excellent in the manner in which you handled those questions. In looking at the Admiral's testimony, he indicates that ISIS has been marginalized thanks to the Iraqi security forces and Kurdish Peshmerga. He speaks of some of the accomplishments that occurred. I'm concerned, though, however, that when you look at the overall funding for counter-ISIS train and equip funding, what the impact might be for Iraqi Kurdish allies. Could you speak for a moment as to our support for the Iraqi Kurdish allies and what the support might be there?
Congressman, thank you. We have the greatest appreciation for our Iraqi Kurdish partners. It's hard to find a more willing, capable group to work alongside. And we welcome the support funding that Congress has provided to continue that partnership. This has become particularly stark, and I'll be maybe more general how I speak here, but Operation Epic Fury has shown that the Shia militia groups in Iraq have a lot of agency and independence to act in ways that are harmful to the United States, which has only showcased how helpful the Iraqi Kurdish partners are.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for attending this and your testimony. and our appreciation for the hard work and the sacrifices being made by the men and women in our military as they operate in the CENTCOM area. Mr. Zimmerman, the administration formally notified Congress on or about May 5th that hostilities against Iran had been terminated. Is that correct?
My understanding is, as you say, that notification went out.
You have a real difficult time answering questions directly, don't you? So you notified that it was terminated, correct?
Correct.
All right. Now, Admiral Cooper, have you reduced the state of preparedness for our troops in the region?
Congressman, consistent with my responsibilities as a combatant commander, I'm prepared to execute a broad range of contingencies. Where we sit today, we're executing a blockade, and we're prepared for further direction, depending on how negotiations go.
So the state of preparedness remains at its highest level?
It does.
Thank you. Are American troops still in harm's way?
Depending on a variety of contingencies, yes.
Are American forces defending against Iranian threats?
When threatened, we always defend ourselves.
Okay. Did CENTCOM fire on Iranian attackers running the blockade on May 6th and 8th?
We fired on, after going through a series of de-escalation measures to get tankers to stop, consistent with the blockade, we disabled those tankers.
So you did fire on Iranian tankers on May 6th and 8th?
We disabled them, yes. We fired on them, and as a result of the fire, they were effectively disabled.
Did the U.S. launch strikes against Iranian military sites on May 7th?
So the United States forces in the execution of defensive mission in moving destroyers from the Arabian Gulf back into the Gulf of Oman were fired upon dozens of times. We defended ourselves.
So
and
American forces were fired upon by Iran, and you fired back.
That's exactly right.
Thank you. Is it your military assessment that hostilities have been ceased since April?
We remain in a ceasefire. Yes.
That's not my question. My question was military assessment that hostilities have ceased since April.
My military assessment is the ceasefire has set the foundation for military hostilities to cease. Iran pushes it.
So the hostilities have continued.
Well, Iran clearly attacked our ships, as you described, dozens of times. Yes, sir.
I'm really very, very sorry for the two of you. You just cannot answer a question correctly and directly, but you're doing the best you can. It's incredible to me that this department has such disregard for the Congress and the U.S. Constitution, that the U.S. military forces are not still engaged in hostilities and still deployed against the war and ignoring the War Powers Act and the Constitution. I'm going to let it go at that. The fact of the matter is that hostilities continue. And I would like to enter into the record, Mr. Chairman, 10 different press releases from the Department of Defense that specifically discuss the continuing hostilities. I'd like now to turn to Africa. General Anderson, you indicated a 75% reduction of military support in Africa. Is that correct from your testimony?
In the posture in West Africa, yes, sir.
Okay. Is USAID a critical element in the African strategy going forward?
So there is a role for targeted aid that supports security and stability that is part of the many tools that the government uses across Africa.
USAID available to do that?
USAID
exist, does it?
It does not exist today, sir, no.
So, and is there a famine in Sudan?
Conditions are becoming quite dire in Sudan when it comes to food support.
Okay. The fact of the matter is that the U.S. military, question to you, can the U.S. military carry out its activities in Africa without the kind of support that USAID was providing to the African people and African economies and communities?
So the military is still able to continue its execution of military objectives and military activities on the continent.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes himself for some questions. And gentlemen, thanks again for joining us today. Admiral Cooper, I want to begin with you and to get your perspective on the Iranian regime's attacks against civilian targets, both in the Gulf region and neighbors in the entire vicinity. We know historically they've used proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, to maim, torture, and kill innocent civilians, including Americans. We know that now the regime has blood directly on their hands and things that they've done most recently, and we've seen that. It's pretty alarming as to how they are escalating things within that realm. To me, it's pretty clear that the destabilizing force in the Middle East is Iran, and they intend to continue that. There's also very distinct differences between how the United States operates and how Iran operates in this time of conflict in that region. I wanted, though, to rewind a little bit and go back to where things started, and that was last December, and get your perspective on how you were monitoring the anti-regime protests and efforts there in Iran. What was your assessment of that? What did you find, and what did you see? And then, how many civilians do you assess were killed or hurt in those counter efforts by the government against its civilians?
Congressman, we'd assess that number to be in the tens of thousands of civilians killed by the regime.
Okay. And what was your assessment when you evaluated that back in December as far as what the Iranian government was doing against its civilians?
As things started in December, you could, at the infancy of protests, you could see Iran initially, the regime initially addressing this in the teens and low hundreds, eventually evolved by January into the killing of tens of thousands.
Okay, very good. Let me ask, too, since the conflict has begun, how many drones and missiles has Iran launched, and how many of those have targeted civilian sites? And can you give us some examples of the civilian targets that have been struck by those drones and missiles?
Yeah, Congressman, I think the specific number of drones and missiles are best addressed in a classified forum, which follows this. I'll talk about there. But what I can say here is Iran
Can you just give us orders of magnitude, hundreds, thousands?
Thousands.
Okay.
What I can say here is Iran deliberately targeted civilians in the Middle East at least 1,000 times. We've seen many of this play out on TV. Restaurants in Bahrain, restaurants in neighborhoods in UAE, the same thing in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. We saw before our very eyes on TV, you saw it yourself, yes. Cluster munitions going off over Tel Aviv, targeting civilians. Yeah. It was crystal clear.
How many civilians do you estimate have been killed, or casualties, we'll call them in general, which includes killed and injured, by these attacks since combat operations have begun?
At least 300 killed and injured, sir.
Okay, very good. Do you believe that the regime's attacks on civilian targets are indiscriminate? Are they focused? Are they purposeful? Do you see a commonality in the things that they're doing in defining these targets and going after them?
The 1,000 attacks were deliberate.
Okay. Was there any rhyme or reason that you saw behind what Iran was doing and who they were targeting? Was there any purpose behind that, or was it just indiscriminate?
I see. I think you saw a terror regime executing terror-like attacks, living up to their billing more than 1,000 times. The only rhyme or reason and consistency, it was against innocent civilians.
Gotcha. Let me ask this. You bring up innocent civilians, and that I think is a critical point here. The regime kind of talks both ways, talks about wanting to settle things and wanting to bring their country back to a stable state, yet with them indiscriminately targeting innocent human lives, the regime seems not to have any regard for innocent civilians and is wanting to continue its theocracy there. Give me your perspective about where you think the regime has been when all this began back in December and where it is today. Has that place in their mindset changed based on this, or are they still on the path of indiscriminately targeting civilians?
They remain on the same path, Congressman. We saw them kill tens of thousands of their own people, and since the ceasefire, we've seen them hang dozens of people. Gotcha. Just yesterday, you saw the chief of police proudly announce that they arrested 6,500 Iranians for no reason.
Mm-hmm. So none of this has changed within the regime. They're still trying to suppress their own people, still trying to have that iron fist on their population there to keep them under control, regardless of what happens elsewhere.
I completely agree.
Very good. With that, I'd yield back, and now we'll go to Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming here today. Much discussion about the most relevant issue here. That's the war in Iran and the reason why we're there, or the reason listed. But I think we all can agree that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. That is almost at every beginning of a statement, the first thing we talk about. And certainly we understand that. So, Admiral Cooper, in your testimony, pages 6 and 7, you outline the assets that CENTCOM has destroyed in Iran. Your assessments that we have destroyed approximately 85% of the ballistic missiles, drones, and naval industrial base, preventing their ability to execute operations, stunt their ability to reconstitute their force. Despite that assessment of degraded capabilities, what wasn't happening prior to this war is now happening, and that's the Strait of Hormuz being closed. Can you give us the difference between that assessment, which you laid out to us, and how the straits are now closed?
Congressman, thank you very much for that. I think these are two separate matters. There is a linkage that I'd like to discuss in a closed forum for sure. With respect to their conventional capability, if I zoom out and directly to the ranking member's point, from a military strategy perspective, we absolutely derailed decades of what Iran was trying to achieve with their ballistic missiles, their nuclear program, and the proxies. That's one piece of it. I think equally important is their ability to build and reconstitute. That's been eliminated. This will not. So that part's been eliminated. On the Strait of Hormuz itself, yes, sir, to your question, I think there's several important factors here. The blockade itself, which we are controlling, nothing is going in or going out. On the Strait, there are a lot of it's a complex environment. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs characterized it this way. Iran's capability is significantly degraded. So their voice is very loud.
So why is it closed?
As we sit here today, there are low volumes of ships that are going in and out. Factors, we had 2 U.S. flag ships go out just last week.
If you look at your gas prices, nobody's thinking that Strait of Hormuz is open. That is the real measure that we go with. But let me go on. Excuse me. In the wake of Operation Midnight Hammer, Congress, House Armed Services Committee, and most importantly, American people were assured that Iran's nuclear capabilities and their amount were completely destroyed. The president's own words, completely and totally obliterated. This assessment was why that operation was done. If it is completely destroyed, how is it that the issue of a nuclear weapon is still the #1 focus, and we're not addressing that?
Congressman, I think anything regarding the Iranian nuclear program is best placed in a classified
well, these are words that the president has used. So if it has been destroyed, why are we in this war? Because destroyed means it's not coming back. Your actual publications talk about the term destroyed, that it cannot be reused. It is completely useless. So if it has been destroyed, why is a nuclear weapon the #1 issue?
Again, sir, I think anything regarding Iranian nuclear weapons capability is best discussed in a classified forum, and I'm happy to talk about it.
So I have to assume by that statement that either A, it has not been completely destroyed, and that's why we have to go back in the classified, and I get that. Because if it was, we wouldn't be at war. With that, I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, is now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm going to read this just for the benefit of the American citizens and others that are watching. This is from Dan Zimmerman's testimony. The Center of Islamic Terrorism has shifted from the Middle East to Africa. There's another statement in here that says Islamic terrorists in Africa are both capable and intent of striking the U.S. homeland. Is that correct, Mr. Zimmerman?
Correct.
General Anderson, your statement, terrorism remains the most acute threat in Africa. U.S. AFRICOM's area of responsibility has become the center of gravity for global jihadism, with West Africa accounting for over 51% of global terror-related deaths in 2024. ISIS West Africa, JNIM, Al-Qaeda, pretty powerful paragraph written there that I hope some people will take heart to. What can AFRICOM, as you know, I spent a fair amount of time on the continent between this committee and another one, not do today that it could do 5 years ago, and what is being done to correct that?
Congressman, I think the best example I can give is that 5 years ago when I was commander of Special Operations Command Africa, we rescued American hostage Philip in 96 hours, largely because we had access, placement, and relationships. Today, Kevin Rideout is on day 209 of his captivity because we do no longer have the same level of relationships and access that we had before. We are working to rebuild that access and engage with those folks in those different countries to address the common threat.
So we lost Airbase 101 and 201 that did tremendous damage to our ISR cover. I went to Nigeria, I spoke with, I know, Minister Toumba and several others, and what was relayed to me is that they didn't appreciate the lecture that they got from Secretary Faye and Dr. Wallander at that time, and that is why we were asked to leave Nigeria, is that because we did not respect the sovereignty of that country under the previous administration. Is that your understanding?
Congressman, I can't speak to that exact meeting. I can address that sovereignty is a very important aspect to all the African countries.
It was made very clear to me that when the United States was a guest in a country that we did not need to think that we could come into a conference room in a leadership circle and lecture them about what we would and would not do in their country. And I'm concerned about the loss of the relationships that occurred because of the arrogance and the lecturing that occurred many years ago. And I do think Secretary Rubio is trying to regain that credibility with those countries. I was in Burkina Faso not too long ago. The leadership in that country was very pointed. They want trade, not aid, which I think is where the administration is headed, and that they had just expelled the French and they were not going to trade one master for another master, is literally word for word what the way it was put to me from the leadership of Burkina Faso. Is that consistent with what you hear? They are not going to trade one master for another?
Congressman, that is consistent with what I hear across the region.
So with the loss of access in Niger and the growing Russian influence in the Sahel, what are the most urgent basing and overflight gaps, and what authorities or resources do you need to restore operational reach?
Congressman, the biggest concern I have is the growing black hole of intelligence in the Sahel with the withdrawal of the French and much of the European partners. As you mentioned, our withdrawal from Niger. It is very difficult for us to provide adequate I&W. So what we are looking at is investments in non-traditional ISR capabilities as well as traditional intelligence surveillance in order to layer these, and that includes open source as well as exquisite. And so building that network in order to illuminate what's happening in the Sahel is our top priority.
General Anderson, in my last 3 seconds, I want to read one other sentence from your statement. The PRC sees Africa as their second continent and critical to their economic and military future. We as Americans need the relationships with the continent of Africa. The critical minerals, as well as the ability to fight terrorism, is contingent upon our relationships over there. I have tremendous faith in you, General Anderson, and I look forward to working with you to restore that access. I yield.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Moulton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Cooper, you keep using the term significantly degraded. Last summer, we were told that Iran's nuclear weapons program was obliterated. Can you clarify the distinction between obliterated and significantly degraded?
Congressman, again, I think appropriate to talk about anything regarding the Iranian nuclear program.
No, I'm not asking you to
Classified
talk about the Iran nuclear program. I'm asking you to talk about English language. What's the difference between obliterated and significantly degraded? Are they the same?
Congressman, anything regarding the nuclear program.
I'm not asking you to
Best
talk about the
discussed.
nuclear program, Admiral. I'm asking you to answer a question that applies to a lot of things beyond the nuclear program. You've also said that their ballistic missile program was significantly degraded. What does that mean?
The specific numbers are best, as you know from your own military
President Trump's own
experience.
national security strategy, which he signed in December, 5 months ago, used the exact same phrase, significantly degraded. So if this was true back then, 5 months ago, then why did we start this war? Was he lying to us then?
Congressman, from a military perspective, anything regarding
Admiral,
the
are you
nuclear
familiar
program,
with
if I may-
General?
if I-
Are you familiar
all
with General
respect-
Westmoreland?
I'm very familiar, Congressman.
He's well known for talking about body counts. Now, when I think about you in this war, I always think about how you always got up there and would say everything's going according to plan. So let me just ask, Admiral, where was closing the strait in the plan?
I'm happy to discuss the specific operational aspects.
So did you just not anticipate that? Did you not think that Iran could do that? Or was that part of the plan here?
Congressman, as
For 250 years, the Navy has kept sea lanes open and free. Under every previous president, the Strait of Hormuz has been open. So why is it closed under your watch?
Congressman, I've traveled through the Strait of Hormuz probably 100 times. I'm intimately familiar with it as a combatant
So
commander.
why is it closed? If you're so familiar with it,
If
did you not
if I may
anticipate
ask-
that
if I
Iran
may
might...
answer the question, if I may answer with respect, with all due respect. My responsibility as a combatant commander is to lay out all the options, present those to the Secretary and the President. They make policy-level decisions.
So you presented the option.
The operational aspect.
So,
of
Admiral,
this.
you presented the reality that Iran might close the strait to the President and the Secretary of Defense.
Anything that I discuss with respect to
Okay, well, let's go back to
recommendation-
the plan. Where was begging China for help opening the strait part of the plan?
So from a military perspective,
There are multiple reports now public that Iran has already reconstituted many of its bombed-out missile sites. Was that part of the plan, too?
those reports are inaccurate.
Okay. I will actually give you credit for regime change. I know that was part of the plan. You've replaced an 86-year-old in failing health with a fatwa against producing nuclear weapons, with a more hardline guy in his 50s who, in case he wasn't hardline enough, you killed his immediate family. Was that part of the plan? Is that the regime change you wanted?
Congressman, we were given very specific military objectives to degrade Iran's power projection capability. That's exactly what we did.
Okay, so in the course of doing that, you also lifted the oil sanctions on Iran, giving them about $14 to $16 billion. They can buy a lot of ballistic missiles for that. Was that part of the plan? Lifting oil sanctions on them in the course of the conflict? They kill 14 Americans, we lift oil sanctions on them?
As you know, sir, the U.S. military does not lift sanctions. That's a policy decision.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out where it was part of the plan. On March 5th, you talked about how you built the most integrated air missile defense or air defense system in the Middle East, and yet well into the war you had to ask Ukraine for help with defenses against drones.
That's not accurate.
Okay. What about oil prices, gas prices? Was oil prices going up 56% part of the plan?
Congressman, as you know, from a military perspective, we don't deal in oil and gas prices. I defer to the appropriate authorities within the government. To
Okay, so since none of this seems to be part of the plan, what's the plan now? What's the plan now to actually win this war? Because it feels like we're losing. We don't have a nuclear deal. We don't have the strait open. The president has called for unconditional surrender. Is that part of the plan?
Congressman, we achieved all our military objectives. We're presently in a ceasefire. We're executing a blockade, and we're prepared for a broad range of contingencies.
Well, it doesn't seem to be going well, and I would like to know how many more Americans we have to ask to die for this mistake. Do you know?
I think it's an entirely inappropriate statement from you, sir.
Gentleman's time is
With
expired.
all
Now
due
recognized
respect. With all due
It's not a
respect.
statement, it's a
Chair
question.
now recognizes the gentleman from
With all due
Tennessee,
respect.
Dr. Desjardins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Cooper, Israel, Jordan, and our partners in the Gulf demonstrate historic capabilities and cooperation to defend themselves and enable Operation Epic Fury. This trust was not built overnight. What role does CENTCOM's long-run